Welcome to Wellness with John. I'm John Peters, and these are resources to help you thrive. So, in today's video, I'm going to talk about one of the essential things that you have to do if you're trying to get on top of your anxiety and not let it be out of control. So, stay tuned. Okay, so in today's video, I want to talk about an essential ingredient to getting on top of your anxiety. And if you are someone who is trying to address your anxiety in a holistic way, there are broad things that you have to consider, and you should check out my various videos on the topic of anxiety on this channel for good advice. But I want to talk today about an essential thing that you really have to have as a component of your overall wellness plan in order to lower your anxiety. And what I'm talking about is exposure to news and social media posts that incite strong, challenging emotions and the anxious reaction. Because a common issue with people I talk to in general, and especially people I talk to who are anxious, what I find is that a component of anxiety is that it's coming from this very broad political social sphere, and the ways that people engage with politics and society and their social network are not always healthy, and sometimes very strongly set the person up for elevated baseline anxiety. And let me start by saying I am not at all offering this as an argument to go stick your head in the sand, to be unaware, and to not have appropriate civic engagement to be a good person, both to be in integrity with yourself and your world. Personally, I think that being aware of what's happening in society and around you is important. And I also think that civic engagement is a way to have a deeply fulfilling life. And personally, I think that each of us has a responsibility to those around us to be engaged in ways that are supportive of good families and neighborhoods and communities and societies, even though there are 1,000 ways to work that out. And that's not what I'm going to get into in this video. But suffice it to say, I'm not arguing that we need to be unaware and uninvolved in order to not be anxious. Okay. But I do think that we need to moderate our exposure to specific types of triggers as we are working out for each of ourselves in our individual lives how to be appropriately aware and engaged. Okay. Because what happens is that we expose ourselves to social media platforms and we expose ourselves to news platforms that don't have natural limits and are rich and pervasive. And what this means is that if we don't impose some sort of personal limit, then that information is too available too much of the time. And in particular, the way that we experience engagement with particular news items and particular social media posts induces the anxious response. Okay. So, just to review a little bit of what we need to know about our anxious response is that when we perceive something that our brain sees as a danger or a threat, then a fight or flight, fawn, freeze kind of response gets kicked off. Part of what happens with this response is some stress hormones, including cortisol, get released and they hang out in our system for a bit, and so that means that when we encounter a danger, that response, which was designed for a quick onset, quick offset, so a quick danger experience that then resolves relatively quickly, what happens is that we fire off these stress hormones so much that we are building up too much of that cortisol and the other excitatory stress hormones in our body. And it's not wearing off. Okay. And the fight or flight response was designed in our bodies to deal with actual threats to our individual self. And part of the problem with our stress experience when we watch the news and when we read a troubling social media post is that we're having that anxious response because, in one way or another, our brain is perceiving some sort of danger, right? Because we're using danger very broadly. It doesn't just mean a saber-toothed tiger is about to eat me. But if open your news channel that you watch, however you watch it, and it talks about, like gun violence and gun reform politics and stuff like that, and you get upset by it, that anxious inner reaction is a type of danger reaction, even though you're not in some sort of immediate physical danger. Okay. It's the exact same system that gets fired off when you get triggered by the thing that you perceive, even if the thing you perceive is a news story about something that's happening half a world away. Okay. So what happens is, you're getting triggered by something that is not immediately in your environment that you actually have to react to. And it's also something that is not under your control. Now, again, this is not an argument for irresponsible apathy and just disengagement in order to not be stressed. But it is important to examine the number of times that we expose ourselves to things that are out of our control, that are going to cause us to have that danger response, but that we cannot deal with immediately to resolve. And it's also incumbent on us, I think, to examine our relationship. So, what are the patterns that we engage in exposing ourselves to this type of response? Okay. Because I think there are multiple motivations that cause people to get into a constant pattern of exposure to these sources of danger triggers that add to stress, but not necessarily in a constructive way. And they're not things that we can engage with and have some sort of sense of control over in order to resolve it and to have a positive relationship with it or a positive experience of it. And I think that the motivations and the patterns are sustained in complex ways. I don't think it's simple and there's just one thing. So, for example, I think people, number one, scroll social media just out of habit, sometimes as a stress reliever after work. Oh, I want to distract myself from my stress of work, so I'm going to just scroll, scroll, scroll. Sometimes people get, kind of addictive relationships with social media platforms or watching the news because it's a type of dopamine hit because of the things that are rewarding with that type of engagement. And I also think that there's a genuine, legitimate desire, as I mentioned, to be sufficiently informed, right? People often will say when they talk about this issue with me in sessions that, well, I don't want to be ignorant. I want to know what's going on. I want to be well informed. Or when I go to vote, I want to know about the candidates, things like that. There's a legitimate desire there, right? But you have to understand that once you say, okay, so there's some reason I want to point myself toward these sources of information, then you have to say, what do I do then? Because there has to be some sort of moderating factor to provide a limit because the platforms of news and social media do not have natural limits and in fact are designed to keep you engaged, right? So news programs are shows that promote engagement because they can sell advertising, right? Social media platforms promote engagement because they can sell advertising, right? The sources that you're pointing yourself toward are intentionally designed to enthrall you and increase engagement. They're not designed to provide you with an easy answer to where your limits should be in order to appropriately engage, but to not unduly burden yourself with too much of the fight or flight response, right? That is not their concern. And that is your concern. That's my concern that each of us as an individual has to moderate the extent to which we're overburdening ourselves with anxiety. So, so what I suggest to you is that you examine the effect that your exposure to whatever sources of these types of triggers are, because that's where the information comes from in order to give you the answer of how and to what extent you should moderate your involvement. Because part of what you can pay attention to is your stress level and your reactions. So when you take in the information, what do you notice about what you do with it? Where does it go? Maybe there are some aspects of that that are constructive. You read a news story about a political issue, and then at some point you write an email to your representative. Okay, so that's constructive. But when we specifically look at the reactions that happen with the pattern of very frequent, high level, ongoing involvement with these types of triggers, there's plenty of it that is not constructive, that is destructive stress. And that is the guide to help you both shape how you're going to be open, aware, and involved, but also how you're going to moderate your exposure to these platforms that are providing this information that I guarantee is triggering you more than you need. Okay, this is just such a common issue. It came out in a very poignant way, of course, during the pandemic when people were kind of stuck at home and had more opportunity than usual to expose themselves to news. And then there was the troubling news about multiple different things. We have the pandemic and then other types of social issues that were going on. It was drawing people's attention in, but many people I talked to said that after they decided to start limiting the amount of doom scrolling they were doing on social media platforms and the amount of exposure that they were doing with news sources, that they were able to start to get a handle on their anxiety, which the reason they were doing this in the first place in terms of the introspection about the issue was that lots of people had overwhelming anxiety that was very debilitating during the pandemic. And this is true even beyond the scope of thinking about issues related to the pandemic. So I recommend this. This is not the one thing you should do, but this is an essential thing you should do, right? There are many things if you want to broadly address your anxiety and be happier and thrive and just not be as miserable as you are. There are many things that you need to do. And if you want to check out a free book that I wrote that's a comprehensive, short but comprehensive guide for some easy to learn, easy to practice techniques that are very reliable to quickly reduce your anxiety, I'll put a link down in the description below. It's just courses.johnpeters.online/free stress ebook. Click the link, you can get the free stress ebook, and it can teach you some ways to lower your stress. But one thing I wanted to share in this video, and what I want you to take away here, is that you are the one who has to decide how to moderate your exposure to stress triggers. There are some things that we can't be in control of in our lives that do stress us out. But one of the things that we can be in control of is how much we are exposing ourselves to information that's going to trigger that danger signal, but about issues that may be relevant and meaningful and stuff that we need to know about and be engaged with in some way, but are potentially going to unduly burden us with more anxiety than is constructive for our individual lives and even for our civic self as well. Okay? So hope you find this content enlivening, and if you do, please hit the like button below. And I always welcome comments on the videos because that helps me learn about how these videos are landing on people and it helps me craft future videos for the channel. And I will see you in an upcoming video.